Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited to be in Iowa again today, and we are here with JD Scholten, who is running for House Congress, the House of Representatives, and in District 4. So for those of you who don't know Iowa and how it's split up, District 4 is going to be your northwest quadrant and the area that we've been spending most of our time. What's interesting about this space is that it is extraordinarily red, or as JD put it earlier, ruby red, if you will. And so as a Democrat, it's interesting to walk through this space and get different perspectives. I've had the honor and privilege of talking with folks all over this area and really enjoyed getting to know the differences and also the similarities. But today we're going to put a little bit of a face to it. So JD, if you will, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here and why did you want to run in this district?
So born and raised in this district. I'm a fifth generation Iowan, first to be raised in town. Come from a long line of farmers and educators, very Iowan. 2016, that election influenced a lot of people, and it infected me. And I wanted to make a change. And I was living out of state, and my grandma, who's my inspiration in life, she, the last thing she told me before she passed was, you need to move back to Iowa and take care of the farm. And I ended up moving back to my home right here in Sioux City. And after a while, nobody was running in this race against Congressman King, and so we decided to launch, and it was very humbly. We did a grassroots movement that continued to grow and grow, and in the 2018 cycle, we moved the needle 24 points, which is the third most in the nation. We outperformed the top ticket by 17%, and we got 25,000 more votes than there are Democrats in this district, and so we just had this strategy of go out there, not writing anybody off, and trying to earn votes, and that's what we were able to do. We ended up losing by 3, but we launched again in August, and we picked up right where we left off, and here we are today.
Wow, so what do you think was the difference being able to capture those extra 25,000 votes?
It's going out there and meeting people with where they're at, and having a message that also connects. I know there's DC seems to want to just divide us, or a lot of folks want to divide us. We're trying to bring people together, and so I have a lot of people who said this is the first time I ever voted for a Democrat, and we just continue to build our base. Right now, this week we're finishing up our first 39 county tour, going to all 39 counties, and doing it in towns of under 1,000 people. We call it the Don't Forget About Us tour.
I love that.
And what's great is that, I mean, we don't hear some of the stuff that makes the Washington Post or New York Times.
Right.
A lot of these towns are fighting to keep their grocery store, and that doesn't get talked about enough. And so it's getting harder and harder to live in rural America. And so that's what we're out there, and just going out there to listen and just have that dialogue with folks.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly difficult, and I've been driving through 20 of the counties, so I'm not quite to the level that you have been, but same thing. We're working with these towns that are very, very small, and one of the things that I've noticed somewhat universally is that there are a lot of storefronts that are closed.
Yep.
And so I actually had a situation where I started to run out of battery because the batteries run out quickly here.
Yeah.
And I started to run out of gas. And so I thought, I've got to pull over. And I drove and drove and drove looking for a place to stop.
Yeah.
And finally there was a little grocery store and they let me in. I said, tell me about your town. Tell me about what's happening here. And you know, they kind of gave some of the comments that you made earlier that when we were off camera, the farms are struggling because there is so much infiltration. So tell us a little bit about kind of how that's evolved and what you want DC to hear about it.
I think there's this national narrative of these tariffs right now, and if these tariffs ended, farmers will be okay, and that's not true at all. And the backbone of this district, we're the second most agriculture producing district in America, and so the backbone of this district are agriculture sector, and then small towns that feed into that, and then the small towns feed into the medium-sized towns, and the medium-sized towns feed into places like here in Sioux City. And so what we're seeing is all these policies right now are get big or get off the farm, and so much of our trade policies, so much of our agriculture policies, it benefits multinational corporations, but it's leaving our farmer and our family farms to the wayside. And so we need to change that narrative. And the number one thing I feel, that whether you're for rural revitalization, whether you're for allowing these farmers to stay on the land and make a dime, or even combating climate change, we have to enforce our antitrust laws, because right now the farmers or these multinational corporations are dictating the inputs on the farmers, they're dictating how they farm, and they dictate the markets. And so of the consumer dollar, less than 15 cents makes it back to the farmer, which is lowest all time. And so this is this district understands that. And so this isn't necessarily a Democrat or Republican issue. We had the same battle 100 years ago, and both sides come together, and we had a Republican, two Republican presidents. We had Teddy Roosevelt and William Taft. Roosevelt had 45 antitrust lawsuits, a lot of it dealt with agriculture, and Taft followed that up by 90 antitrust lawsuits. And so we have gone away from what our founding fathers wanted, because Thomas Jefferson wanted a protection from monopolies in the First Amendment. And so that is our history. I mean, you look at the Boston Tea Party.
Right.
It was a revolt against a monopoly. And so these monopolies, we need to stand up, and our democracy will not succeed unless we have protection from these monopolies.
Challenge,
Yeah.
to throw a wrench in this,
All right.
is looking at this globalization
Yeah.
piece that's coming. Had a situation once, I won't mention the company, but I was doing interviews around the country. I was calling from the Pentagon.
Oh, well.
So usually people answered.
Yeah.
And one of the very large companies in our nation said, "Why do I want to talk to you?" And I thought, well, everybody says yes. So I was a little caught off guard. But then I walked away and really listened to what the person had to say, the representative. And he said, recognize we are now large enough that we control countries.
Wow.
That we affect the way governments operate. And when I digested that and realized this is not a place where they need us as
Right.
government in the same way that it used to be. It isn't the case that we can control them in the way that we used to be, because this national connection is being lost.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very difficult in these kinds of antitrust scenarios, because they can simply move out, go somewhere else,
Right.
and maybe they don't buy over the farm, but then maybe the farm isn't able to produce as well and compete because they're getting that from somewhere else. It's kind of a huge problem, but it is going to centralize here over time.
I think economically, the number one problem in the U.S. is that we haven't figured out globalization as it affects the working class.
Yes.
And that's why factories get shipped out. What happens to the workers? Same with farming. You look at the tariffs right now. I mean, I'll call out Cargill. Cargill's going to sell to China the soybeans one way or the other, whether it's through South America or from our farms here. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's the reality. I want them from here. And so as a nation, we got to figure out, how do we make that work so farmers can still make a dime, and we still have these exports.
Right. So this to me is the heart of the issue, is that we can put controls in place, but then will they be consumed or overrun in another way? Will they constantly be working around us? So how might we be thinking about how we empower the farmers and empower the next generation to both be able to use the land in the way that they have always used the land, but also be thinking forward to this larger competition space? Yeah,
I think a huge part of it, we need to bring farmers to the table on a lot of this.
Great. Yes.
That's the first thing, because when we have these international trade deals and stuff, the multinational corporations, they have lobbyists there, and they're at the table. It's coming here and talking and listening to the folks who are at the ground level doing the work. I think that's a huge part of it. It's also having that balance act of how much do we actually need. Like, we have these policies of continue getting big, get big, or get off the farm. And at some point, you hit a point where it's going to be a few multinational corporations that own all the farms, and the farmers are just contract workers. And so we're getting closer and closer to that point. And I mean, you see low commodity prices for over a half decade at this point. we need to figure out some solutions here pretty quick.
So I think where that starts to tip the scale is as we think about something I talk a lot about is national readiness, and recognizing that from a military perspective, we have the economy, the agriculture, the land, the people. It becomes very mixed.
Yeah.
And as we look at this space, if it is the case that we end up with multinational organizations owning the access to our agricultural resources, what we actually do is end up putting this nation in a position where we're owned by someone else, our food is owned by someone else. And at that point, we are no longer a nation ready for anything that comes our way.
That's right. And Governor Vilsack, who was former Secretary of Agriculture from right here in Iowa, he talks all the time, we're a secure nation because we're a food secure nation.
Yes.
And the minute we lose that it gets dangerous. And so here's a couple of the realities of kind of how locally frustrating things are. So we're here in Sioux City, the largest city in the district that's the second most agriculture producing district in America. We don't have a farm-to-table restaurant. We don't have a co-op.
Not a single one.
No. There's, in all 39 counties, there's only 2 farm-to-table restaurants. Grocery stores in these small towns are moving away because a Dollar General's coming in.
Right.
And farmers aren't making a dime. So if we're not feeding ourselves, farmers aren't making a dime, what are we doing here? And who's profiting off of us? And it just doesn't make sense. And so that's a huge part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, so the argument then becomes it's not just about the individual, it's also about securing the nation.
Absolutely.
I like that.
So, I mean, it's even about feeding us, it's about securing the nation, and it's about finding out how do farmers and the family farm exist in globalization. That's what it's about.
You have a tall order to fill, but I love your concept of being able to bring more people to the table. This is actually a theme I saw around the country. I was in Hawaii, and they were protesting the 30-meter telescope, which is being built on sacred grounds. And when I asked everyone, because they had this beautiful demonstration that they put forth, something I couldn't have even organized, and it gave this profound, moving story, and there was a but, and the but was that they didn't have anyone sitting at the table in Washington to speak on their behalf. And I don't mean always in Congress. I actually mean the day-to-day people, all of us regular, normal Americans, can apply for jobs in the federal government. And when you do that, you get to be at the decision-making table of how funds are allocated or how changes are being made. Is any of that being circulated here locally that people can participate in some ways like you are running for office, but also through jobs or through internships?
I don't know. Like Sioux City and kind of the western northwest Iowa, we're an arm's length away from Des Moines, which is an arm's length away from DC. But on the other side of it is, as much as we produce hogs and corn and soybeans and wind energy, we lead the nation in wind energy too.
Yes.
The number one thing we export are our children. This is
that's a way to put it.
I mean, it's
I understand. Yeah, that's just a
we're
it's a
we're
statement.
an aging district. The majority of kids I grew up with have all moved away, and it's pretty consistent. And they're all a lot of them are doing amazing things.
Yeah.
So we do produce a lot of amazing people, but it doesn't always come back to here, and that's one of the biggest things I've realized in the last couple of years of campaigning in this district are the amount of mothers and grandmothers who have come up to me and said, when you talk about that, my kids, I love them, but one's in Omaha, but one's in San Francisco, one's in Orlando or somewhere, and so you hear that all the time.
So I think that's a great point to close on. What is it that you would want people to know is so wonderful here that we would want to draw people in?
Yeah. I mean, I think Kevin Costner said it best in Field of Dreams of, is this heaven? No, this is Iowa. No, I just think there's so much potential here. And I have friends who work in tech, out both in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Seattle, and they're paying their whole paycheck in rent.
Yes.
We're here, you can buy a 3-bedroom house, a decent one in a decent neighborhood for $140,000, $150,000. So if you work online, it makes sense to move to a place like this, and we need people like that. We need a workforce. We need people coming in here, and my vision for what we want to do in this district, it's especially you see when on the debate stage you hear our two biggest geopolitical threats are China and climate change.
Oh.
If we're going to combat against both of them,
Yes.
it can't just be the coasts, it can't just be urban areas, it's districts like the 4th District that are really going to make a change. And so I'm excited for the opportunity, but we have a lot of work to do. And so I need all the help I can get. So if folks want to move back here, I'd be more than welcome for that.
Well, I will definitely put a plug for the housing here. I have been pleasantly impressed. I won't even say surprised. I've been incredibly impressed by the housing options here.
Yeah.
They're very beautiful homes. They're large homes,
Yeah.
even in the smallest.
Some of these towns have just gorgeous
They
homes.
really do. It
And they're
sticks
cheap.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had to imagine, because you can look around and see from a workforce perspective that the options are not as large. It is primarily agriculture, but
The other thing is we're at 2% unemployment, so it's not hard to find a job here.
No,
And so
no.
if any folks out there struggling to find a job, move to Sioux City, Iowa, you'll get one in a month.
That is a great plug, and I will say Montana has done some of this as well, where they've revitalized through the online access for workforce, and I suspect that is where you're going to get some boon as well in this economy here. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us.